Okay, right, my name is Andrea Immendoerfer, and as Seamus said, I'm working on the project CONCERTO Premium. I'm part of a large consortium that consists of various institutes of the Cultural Institute of Technology and the Steinbeis Europazentrum in Germany. There's quite a lot of people in the consortium because there are in total 58 concerto projects spread across 23 different countries and bundled into 22 projects. Now multiply that times the 20 million bits of data and you get an idea of what we're looking at. Not quite, but I'll come to that. Each of these projects is highly complex because it tackles both the energy supply side, implementing renewable energy measures, and the energy demand, implementing energy efficiency measures. And it's not just a couple of buildings here and there, but whole neighborhoods. And each project uses a holistic approach. There's demand side and supply side, there are new builds, there are refurbishments, there's energy generation. So each of the concerto projects is really a real-life laboratory where monitoring of real-life data is possible. Now this extensive data resource provides information and an evidence base on which decision-making can be based and policy-making. We calculate a set of indicators using the same methodology across lots of the projects in lots of different countries. And our aim is to make all of this information publicly available and to make it as transparent as possible, which I'll explain in more detail in a moment. We also capture the contextual factors, social, demographic, political, and geographic information. So basically, our task is to get all the 20 million bits of data or so from each of the projects and collect it centrally, and then produce various outputs, policy recommendations, a website, a database that allows everyone to make queries, assessments across all the projects, and various handbooks and monitoring guides, all in order to provide information to politicians at various levels, local, national, and EU level, academics, tenants, landlords, and other stakeholders, and also to feed into other similar projects. And not to forget, while CERF is coming to a close, there are lots of concerto projects that are still ongoing, so hopefully outcomes from CERF and other projects that are finishing can improve the ones that are still ongoing. Right, we've defined a set of indicators that span the environmental, economic, social, and technical aspects, as well as the implementation process. And we look at various levels, the components of a building, the building as such, the neighborhood it stands in, and then the concerto community or area, and then the national and EU level. So our main aim is to create an online tool that everyone can access. You can define a query, pick sites on a map, and define the bits of information that you want to have. And eventually it spits out graphs and tables giving you the data. And it's very important to also give you contextual information. So this isn't fully working yet. As you'll appreciate, it is rather complex with that many sites. But we are calculating indicators alongside and have some results to show you. At the moment, we've got some analysis of, I think it's around 420 existing refurbished buildings and around 140 new buildings spread across various countries. The bottom graph the long bar here is of interest to you because that's the Irish refurbished buildings. And you can see there's rather a lot of them compared to what else we have at the moment. So just to point out, the SURF project is very important to us because data availability is really good. And there's monitoring being done in many different buildings. A lot of other projects only monitor a few representative units. Right, so the type of data we look at, just to give you a brief flavor, might be something like final energy demand of refurbished buildings. Now the little crosses, and I appreciate it's not terribly easy to see. So the little crosses, they're all the Irish buildings, and there are a few others in there as well. Anything above the red line means there is an actual improvement from before the refurbishment to after. Anything above the blue line means it's a 50% improvement. So luckily there's quite a lot of your Irish little purple crosses above the 50% improvement line. Similar thing for CO2 emissions after refurbishment. Again, you're looking at what's above the black line, that's the improvements. Strangely, a few have dropped below, which we'll have to analyze why that is. And then we've got lines for 50% and even 80% improvement, and quite a few sit above the 80% line. Then something else we might look at are capital costs per square meter of retrofitted buildings. And it starts fairly low, and there are a lot of them spending less than 100 euros per square meter. And then there are a few that spend a hell of a lot more. We happen to know that this very high one is in Hanover. Right. Then moving on, CO2 abatement costs, euros spent per kilogram CO2 saved. Anything that's negative means it's economically viable, and again there's lots and lots below the zero line. Now remembering that most of the buildings we have currently in the database are the Irish buildings, the important message is you've really gone for very cost effective and CO2 effective measures. But not all of them are. And in some ways, I know these graphs are difficult to see. There are a hell of a lot of bars on them, and you're wondering, right, so why do we have the ones that stick out, being exceptionally good at this end or rather not so good at this end? And the point I'm coming to is really that you need all of this contextual information for each of these bars, really, each of these many hundreds that we can potentially produce for the many buildings in the CONCERTO projects. So you just want to know what sort of buildings are being represented here. How big are they? Are they residential or non-residential? What measures have actually been implemented in these buildings? And then there are other factors that relate more to the calculation of the indicator. Anyone who's ever worked on an EU project knows that a square meter is not a square meter and a kilowatt hour is not necessarily a kilowatt hour. So we need to tell you what assumptions we've made so that you can judge, is it actually comparable what you're seeing or not. So it's things like CO2 factors, interest rates, and we've got all of this data in huge data tables. And theoretically, you need all of this information shown here for each bit of the 20 million data items that the SURF project can produce. So you can see the challenge, but our aim is to make this user-friendly. We're just not quite there yet, so please bear with us. We will have an early demonstration version in October for a workshop in Brussels. Right, now if you've got any questions with regard to the data, please don't ask me, ask my lovely colleague Julian Stengel, who's sitting here with the curly hair. He knows most of the bits of data in our data collection. Myself, I'm working on a slightly different front. I'm dealing with policy recommendations. We are supposed to make recommendations at local, national, regional, and EU level, and also advise EC funding providers. Unsurprisingly, we will produce reports. I'll have to pick Seamus' brain on how to bind them, since that seems to be crucial. We'll produce booklets for municipalities on the lessons learned from Concerto and best practice. And we have a policy section on our website, which is up and running already on www.concerto.eu. You can click on a country and you can get a brief overview and further links to energy policy in the country. So things we look at in our research are building control in the different countries, the spatial planning, the wider energy planning and other related policies and regulations, and very importantly, the social factor, the people factor. Last but not least, of course, the economic aspects, business models and such. So broadly speaking, we want to learn what were the barriers encountered by Concerto projects and what made projects successful projects. So to just illustrate this a bit more with some examples, when talking of building control, we want to know in which countries you are actually currently obliged to integrate renewable energy just to pass building regulations, and whether there are trigger points for energy efficiency improvements in existing stock. And an important point, what about the compliance of the actual construction? Are there on-site checks like air tightness checks, etc. Then in terms of spatial planning, this was quite interesting yesterday to hear how you put together the master plan for Cloud Jordan and the planning obligations that went together with that. And you did have an obligation to connect to the district heating there. And the question is, where can that be done? Can it be done in all 22 countries or not? Sorry, 23. Also, do local authorities in the Concerto areas use systematic mapping of renewable potentials and also of the energy demand? And how do they deal with listed buildings? The social indicators we've defined are the degree of satisfaction and acceptance by inhabitants, level of information and direct participation, the active householder behavior, and internal comfort levels. Barriers might include legal barriers, some rules against biomass due to air emissions, economic barriers. It comes up time and time again, the economic crisis, which has affected pretty much each and every Concerto project, and social barriers, lack of awareness typically. Success factors, well, here in Cloud Jordan, clearly it seems to be this group of people who were very committed to bring about an eco-village somewhere in Ireland, which was really instrumental to bring about the successes that Seamus has been talking about. Economic success factors, again, here we can learn from the SURF project, because you had a rather interesting business model to begin with. I hope that this is going to be explained in more detail, but I learned yesterday how really this committed group who started off the eco project had to go scraping around for funds using a Stockhold system, I believe it was called, to then eventually qualify for bank loans and so on. One important aspect for us is always, where did private residents have to contribute to a Concerto project, and how could they be convinced to do that, and what help did they receive? Also, an important role was often played by a municipal energy supply company. In the German-speaking countries, that would be the so-called Stadtwerke. So these were just some examples of the types of information we're currently gathering. Now multiply that times 58, and you can imagine certain gaps will appear, and that's our starting points for policy recommendations. However, beyond that, we would also invite you to give us your suggestions, anything to do with the running of EC-funded projects or your ideas on how to reach the 2020 targets of the EU, or 2050 targets for that matter. Or any thoughts you have on standardization in the field of energy. So if you have any thoughts, either talk to me today or drop us a line at policy.ideas@itas.kit.edu. Or you can also jump on the Concerto forum, which you can access via our website. You have to register and then click on entering the forum, and you find a range of topics that you could discuss with other participants. So basically, do keep your ideas coming, and thanks very much for listening.